guys, never skip legs day, but arms. Arms. Oh, fuck you guys, you ain't got no goddamn sense of humor. Shit, I'm playing my fucking big punch stuff.
Hey man!
Hey man! Let me guess, you're working on arms because you're doing an arms video, right?
Yeah?
Yeah, original. You know what else is original?
Your mama?
No, dumbass! Talents, gear, covenants, rotation, legendaries, and more!
So your mama's not original?
Motherfucker, she ain't no copy!
That's okay, guys. He didn't catch me because he skipped legs day. But you know what you shouldn't skip is the sub and like notification bell. Ha, segue. We're really good. We're professionals. But no, really. WoW is not doing too well right now. And I mean, we still enjoy making these videos, and I hope that, you know, you guys enjoy all of these guides and finding them useful. And if you do, hitting that like and enabling those notifications helps us out and helps you out, because we do other stuff than this. And you know, if you don't have the notifications enabled, then YouTube doesn't know if you want to see all of our stuff. So if you want to see our stuff, click the things. 2 clicks. Click it. Come on. Come on. Come on. Pick up your two-hander and start smashing shit with sudden death. This will be your general option for all content, both raiding and Mythic Plus dungeons. This will occasionally proc a free execute to be used regardless of your target's HP level. Arms is a methodical spec that functions more on a thought-out playstyle and not mashing buttons. Having an extra global to fit in your rotation occasionally will help reduce any chance of a downtime that the spec can have, not to mention the sheer damage output it will bring. This entire row is supposed to address rage management, and seeing how sudden death will make your execute free, you can say it helps. On top of that, you can go with Skull Splitter for more control over your rage generation. Outside charge, only a few talents can give you direct rage generation, which Skull Splitter is one of, since the majority of your rage gains will be from your weapon swings. Not much else to say. Skull Splitter helps with downtime by giving you an extra button. Not only does it help with downtime and not cost any rage to use, it actually generates rage. Moving down the list, we have a survivability row? No. A mobility row? No. A CC row? What the fuck is going on here? I'm guessing they just were left with these 3 talents and didn't know where to put them, so it's the leftovers row basically. Double time will be your ideal option for all content, although it may see more use in raiding environments. This will give your charge a second charge. It's actually really useful in boss encounters where you have to move out to drop a puddle, quickly swap to ads, or just dodge shit and quickly charge back in. It works in Mythic Plus dungeons as well for the same reasons, only that there you will find fewer scenarios where you need to have that much more mobility, and in exchange you will find Storm Bolt to be a better tool to use, since it's maybe one of the best single target stuns in the game. A 30-second cooldown on a stun that lasts for 4 seconds is really good and really useful, and can outweigh the value of double time, especially if your group is not heavy on stuns. Impending Victory is a good sustain option that not a lot of people use. If you find yourself in a position where this needs to save your butt, use it. On the third row, all options are available. Starting with Rend, you will use it for raids and mainly single target scenarios. It's literally the best option in terms of single target damage. It's a bleed you want to keep up on your priority target at all times. Other than that, an extra button that eats up rage. But with more gear, rage generation becomes better and better, so Massacre is better off with Mythic Plus encounters. Rend just isn't as feasible there, and Massacre isn't a bad option to have. Since the entire row sees a focus towards improving single target, your options for AoE are wonky. Since the only other talent here, Fervor of Battle, makes you want to use Whirlwind instead of Slam. Usually this would be a good AoE option if Whirlwind would be tuned to actually be an ability worth pressing. But with that out of the way, it's literally the only option to increase your AoE potential, if even just slightly, however shitty Whirlwind already is, and it might sacrifice some single target. The fourth tier of talents is actually a defensive row this time. Wait, it has mobility options as well.
Blizzard! Can you touch the right things these time and fix talents? Too soon?
Bounding Stride is what you want for the mobility side of things. It lowers the cooldown on your leap and gives you a small burst of speed at the end of it. This helps when the added mobility aligns with the boss mechanic in raids, or if you simply want to be faster in dungeons to get from A to B. Alternatively, defensive stance is the defensive option to take for all scenarios, especially raids. This is what will make you tankier than most other DPS. Yes, it will take 10% off your damage away, but the price for it is a permanent 20% damage reduction wall on you that will last for however long you decide, minimum 6 seconds cause cooldown. You don't have sustain, and yeah, it's kind of shitty to trade off damage for defensive, but the defensive stance can just be used when you are not on the target, when you transition through the raid dots and boss phases, when you dodge Painsmith spikes, run away from the darkness at Terragru, soak stuff on the 9, and so on, when you don't really have to hit the boss. I personally am happy to trade 10% of my damage to be maybe the tankiest DPS in the game for however long I want to. And lastly, a more controversial one is Second Wind. Maybe the best defensive option here in a long combat phase if you can make it work. It will heal for quite a bit of HP, actually fill your whole health bar in 16 seconds on its own, or at least generate a full HP health bar every 16 seconds. But here is why it's controversial. Clearly, it only works if you haven't taken damage for 5 seconds, and there are rare situations where that happens. There are also mechanics that deal damage to you but don't actually break Second Wind, and likely that will be the case when you would want to use this talent the most. These types of mechanics are specific and change all the time based on how the devs design the encounter. I'm pretty sure the Skyhold community has a list of situations where this can work. What's important is that you know you have these options and each has its own use. Further down, you have Warbreaker as the default for all content. This row is a bit sketchy, and actually we talked a fair bit about it in our Arms Warrior podcast with the big warrior dudes. Essentially, Warbreaker applies Colossus Mesh to all targets in an area, as well as deep wounds. This is the perfect setup for a big AoE burst phase. And I say AoE because this row is supposed to address AoE with every option. You have collateral damage, which was made to help with 2 target scenarios. It kind of doesn't do that anymore though. Some people still use it, and maybe it could actually be good if Whirlwind wouldn't hit enemies like a wet noodle. Cleave seems a bit controversial as well. On one hand, it helps with large sustained AoE fights. Its purpose is to do okay-ish damage while applying deep wounds on a lot of enemies and consuming the overpowered buffs for more damage. Its purpose is clearly to replace Mortal Strike in AoE, and it almost can, save for the fact that it's a bit undertuned and target capped. Like, seriously, let's say you want to deal AoE damage. That means you want Blade Storm and targets debuffed. Why pick Cleave when Warbreaker is much better, since not only does it apply deep wounds, just like Cleave, and the Colossus Mesh debuff, and it's not target capped. Let's say you go with Cleave. First of all, you would not have Colossus Mesh on more than one target. 2, if you use Sweeping Strikes. And if you do and then Blaze Storm, you are shooting yourself in the foot, sacrificing the value of Sweeping Strikes. And second, it also only affects 5 targets. Why? What is to be gained? Just go with Warbreaker. And 6th row has Avatar, the only other ability that will generate rage for you. This is likely to address the fact that simply pressing the cooldown was not interesting outside of the extra rage, simply meaning more damage. It's more damage, just more damage. Same thing with the last row. Dreadnought is outperforming all other options here. It gives you a second charge of overpower and make it generate a seismic wave of damage that hits up to 5 targets. This might be the only reason, or at least the main one, as to why Arms is viable in Mythic Plus scenarios. Not to mention that this also gives you the most single target damage out of this row anyway. If you want to know what your best stats are, you have to sim. I know, right? It sucks, but it is the only real way to know the way of gear. Outside of that, simply go for eye level on most gear. Well, I say eye level, but it's mostly strength, since rings and some trinkets don't have strengths on them, and eye level is a bit more relative there. After that, you really want crit as your main secondary stat. Crit helps with, well, more frequent big hits, but also crits on auto attacks generate 30% more rage, and the value of that should be fairly obvious. Similarly, haste contributes pretty highly to your damage. More weapon swings means more rage overall, and certain abilities scale with haste in their cooldown, or dots like rend will tick faster. Versatility is also fairly close to haste and has defensive potential, which is always really nice, particularly if you PvP. And lastly, mastery. None of these are particularly bad, and aside from crit, which will rock almost always, the others you can sim if you really want to know what's up, and they can always be better between each other. As for your actual consumables, although you can sim them as well, these are more standard than normal stat weights. Your weapon has the choice between Sinful Revelation in raids, where single target damage will be ideal to optimize, and Lightless Force in AoE, mostly Mythic Plus, for, well, the AoE damage min-maxing of course. Use Eternal Skirmish for your chest piece, and that would be a good place to start, with an added Heavy Desolate Armor kit if you intend to min-max your character for some tough content to push. Use Eternal Strength for your gloves and the Fortified Avoidance for your cloak for that extra oomph when it comes to damage reduction. The rings will get the Tenet of Critical Strike, while the gems will have the Deadly Jewel Cluster to go hand in hand with your stat priority, crit being the top. Obviously, these can be changed with whatever secondary stat will perform better for you if crit will ever not be number one. Moving into the alchemy side of things, the Spectral Flask of Power is pretty self-explanatory. You won't use HP flasks now, will you? The potions can vary, but mostly the Potion of Spectral Strength will perform generally the best in 9.1. And to fit in oils, not really, use the Shaded Sharpening Stone or Weight Stone depending on your weapon type. The Shadow Core oil has to be paired with the Phantom Fire Potion to barely even come close to the Strength Potion, and that would only be in single target. Use Strength Pots and Shaded Stones. And lastly, to nobody's surprise I imagine, the Feast of Gluttonous Hedonism will be your best food buff, admittedly expensive, or the Spine Fin Soufflé and Fries as the crit alternative. The topic of Covenants is a hot one since Warrior is one of the few classes that actually has gone through all 4 last patch. The first disclaimer is to go for what you think looks cooler if your goal is not to be in the top 1% or aim for perfect high parses. The differences are there, sure, at least between some of them, but currently Arms Warriors are clearing Mythic Sanctum with all 4 Covenants. Second disclaimer, the top is a bit volatile at the moment and can change based on encounter type and renown level. Night Fae, right now, is the clear winner in both raids and dungeons. Ancient Aftershock hits like a truck and doesn't suffer from AoE penalty like Venthyr did back in Athria. Nia will work the best, as always, with her Nia's Tools Burst as the best single target trait and build to aim for. Obviously, you will snag the first potency slot and move down to her last option on whatever path you wish, although it seems the Finesse one might be the better one for defensive purposes. For Mythic Dungeons, you will want Coleraine with his First Strike trait. It takes you away from a potency slot, sure, but the benefits of it far outweigh the strength of any potency conduit, especially in AoE when you engage a pack with all of your cooldowns up. A noteworthy mention is that by the time you watch this guide, Mechanicos from Kyrian is already fully unlockable with its final trait Effusive Anima Accelerator. This bad boy will make your Spear of Bastion ability a potentially 40-second cooldown for massive AoE burst and rage generation, outweighing Ancient Aftershock in AoE and maybe even in single target. You can still get the benefits of Hammer of Genesis for extra haste and a bunch of other DPS and survivability options that comes with Mechanicos and Kyrian in general. Right now, Necrolord is kicking butt as well if you want to be a buff holder for your group as well. The value that you can bring is higher than what you individually can gain by opting for personal min-max. But that's what I mean. Aside Venthyr, which for some reason is just doing very poorly this patch, all Covenants have a place and a time. And even Venthyr Arms Warriors are kicking more ass than the majority of Night Fae, so it falls down to you what content you want to do and what you really like to play. As for the Conduits, the best potency options are Crush the Ramparts, Mortal Combo, which can be replaced in dungeons with either Destructive Reverberations if you're Night Fae, or Piercing Verdict for the Kyrians. Ashen Juggernaut is also good in dungeons when you get Massacre as a talent. The finesse options will remain as Inspiring Presence, possibly the best utility you can bring to a group, and Safeguard provided you know the implications if using Intercept, particularly on the tank. And the endurance options see you really wanting Stalwart Guardian to reduce the cooldown of Die by the Sword, a very powerful defensive, and the new Conduit Condensed Anima Sphere for some sustain. We mentioned that gear-like trinkets are an exception to stat weight scales. That's because some of the trinkets' procs, since they revolve around damage procs, are unique and not straightforward. Overwhelming Power Crystal remains one of the best trinkets for arms since it aligns perfectly with your cooldowns. Old Warrior Soul is a really good one to aim if you raid specifically, since it drops from Sylvanas, which, although she is the last raid boss, she does drop it at a higher eye level than the rest of the raid, which means you can kill her at a lower difficulty. Phial of Putrefaction is also a good one to aim for, if you're lucky and doing enough Mythic Plus content. Other than that, Strength procs, Haste procs, really any good stat proc trinkets will work really well for you, especially if they can align with Avatar and or Bladestorm. Shards of Domination are the new system of 9.1, cause you got to have new systems. And they are supposed to be a pseudo tier set? No, just... Anyway, they are a big part of your power that has been nerfed and reversed again by the recording of this video, so it's a bit iffy as to where this will go with this system. The shards are basically sockets that go in specific gear slots that only drop in the raid and maybe some outdoor content, but raid mostly. The shards also exclusively drop in Sanctum of Domination. There are 3 types of shards that when used together as 3 of a kind, they complete a bonus for the real damage gain. The bonuses are 3, 1 for each shard type. Unholy has Chaos Bane, Blood has Blood Link, Frost has Winds of Winter, and the best shards out of all of these are the Unholy Shard of Diz, Blood Shard of Beck, and Frost Shard of Core. These individual shards have the most power, and since you have 5 total slots, you can equip these 3 and then use the 2 other slots to complete whichever set you desire. Ideally, you want to prioritize the set first, on top of the 3 separate shard bonuses. There are currently 3 legendaries that can interest you, provided you went with the recommendation we suggested so far in terms of your build. Keep in mind that if you are crafting your legendary right now or you want the Shard of Domination set bonuses, you really want to craft legendaries on anything but headpiece, shoulder, chest, bracers, and gloves. Everything else goes. For raiding, regardless of your covenant, you want Enduring Blow. This baby gives you a 25% chance when you use Mortal Strike to apply Colossus Mesh on the target. With the Conduit Mortal Combo, this will really increase your boss damage pretty significantly, where you can even take it in dungeons if your group really needs the single target damage profile. Signet of Tormented Kings is usually the go-to for Mythic Plus and scenarios where you have to do burst AoE damage. This has been the best option last season and still remains a solid one this season, particularly if you don't play Kyrian, because if you do, then Elysian Might will be even better for burst AoE. Doing 25% more crit damage on a spec that focuses heavy on crit and uses a Soulbind that reduces the cooldown of your Spear of Bash into a 40-second cooldown will make your AoE issues a thing of the past. And since Hunters get some hot new shit, Warriors do so as well. This raid drops Jaethys, the Prison Blade from Kel'Thuzad. This sword is your ideal weapon of choice if you can loot it in the raid. Its special effect is to eat other weapons to empower a proc it has. It has 5 ranks, and starting with the 3rd, on top of a proc of additional physical damage, it will give a strength proc. On the 5th rank, the strength buff is smaller, but proc chance is higher. This is an interesting weapon that's a bit harder to test, but so far, it seems to be the best one if you really want to min-max or simply use the cool new hot shit this season. The opener is simple here. Charge and Bladestorm, especially if you have the Signet Legendary. That's it. The normal single target rotation sees Rend as the most important skill to use when refreshing the dot, and you are also outside the Colossus Mesh window. Pop Avatar with no more than 8 seconds away from being able to use Colossus Smash. Cast Warbreaker / Colossus Smash on cooldown. Prevent capping overpower charges. Mortal Strike next if you have 2 buffs of overpower or if you have the Enduring Blow legendary equipped. Cast Ancient Aftershock or Spear of Bastion during Colossus Smash windows. Use Execute when you get a sudden death proc, or if not talented, use Skull Splitter when you have less than 60 rage or when you are not about to use Blade Storm. Cast Overpower for its benefits to Mortal Strike and the fact it's free damage. Use Mortal Strike on cooldown for the damage and Deep Wounds debuff and fill in with slams. Blade Storm is a trickier ability to use in single target, since the main reason you want to use it is that it doesn't stop you from auto-attacking during it to generate rage. If you don't have to sacrifice any of the above to use Blade Storm on single target, and adds won't spawn during its cooldown to take advantage of the extra damage gains, then use it. During execute phase, your rotation is simplified a tad bit. You still want to use Avatar, making sure you align it with Colossus Smash. Warbreaker on cooldown, Overpower to prevent capping its charges, Mortal Strike when you have 2 buffs of Overpower or when using the Enduring Blow legendary, or to maintain the Deep Wounds debuff. Use Blade Storm when under 50 rage and Overpower as a filler. Anytime you have the chance, you will spam Execute, keeping in mind the above priority to maintain rage generation and optimize buffs and debuffs for maximum damage output. If you play the Enduring Blow legendary, then you just replace Slam with Execute in the normal single target priority rotation. Your priority in AoE changes slightly depending on the number of targets you are fighting. On 2 or 3 targets, you want to use Sweeping Strikes so long as Blade Storm isn't going to come off cooldown during its uptime. Use Skull Splitter when below 60 rage and Blade Storm is not available right away. Warbreaker next on cooldown, Blade Storm during the Colossus Smash window, Execute when possible, Overpower next on the list, Mortal Strike after, Pop Slam if Sweeping Strikes is up, and Whirlwind as a filler. If you have Fervor of Battle talented, you just won't use Slam at all in this rotation. When fighting 4 more targets, you drop Mortal Strike completely from your rotation and use Whirlwind during Colossus Smash window when you cannot use Execute, Overpower, or have Sweeping Strikes up. This is mostly because Whirlwind isn't great for arms, but can have a slight value on enough targets when the big abilities are on cooldown. Shout out to the Skyhole community for compiling a lot of good information that you can use if you want to go deeper into arms as a spec, since we only covered the basics here. A special thanks to MGLL and Garms who helped feedback and check our research and making sure it's top-notch. You can also find online written guides that go deeper into things like rotation, and Archimtiros has a pretty cool Icy Veins guide and links are down below, and I'm sorry if I've mispronounced your name. Thank you to the patrons as well for supporting the content during these tough times, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video. And if you, dear viewer, want to support us a little bit more and want to see more of this content and, you know, like to give something back, the link to our Patreon page is down below. Thank you for watching the video. See you next time.
I've been loving it then, I still love it now. Still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. Getting better every day, let me show you how. Cause still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. It's getting harder to stay, but at the end of the day, it's a guilty pleasure, so just log in and play. Whether it's classic or retail, I'ma do a /bow. Still, I play WoW.